What I want to do is give you a very little background about the development of this and then just dive into using it. About a year ago, somebody was saying, hey, I got this thing from a competitor of yours, and he says you can rate taproot investigations to tell if they're good or not and how good your corrective actions are. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'd like to see that. And he showed it to me, and I thought, boy, this is garbage. This doesn't even have face value, much less proven value. And I thought, well, but if somebody's using it, there must be a need. So I collected some information about what other people were doing to rate investigations. So I went out to our network of Taproot Advisory Board people, and I said, what do you got? And they sent me stuff. And I sat down, and I read all their stuff, and I decided, okay, what I really need to do is I know how Taproot works, and I need to make a rating system based on like any performance indicator that you know what the inputs are to a good evaluation or good investigation. And if your inputs are good and your process is good, you should have good outputs, right? So what I can do is I can go through and rate all that stuff, and I can rate it on maybe a scale of 1 to 10. And I thought, well, you know what I'll do is I'll make a spreadsheet. And then I'll make a weighting factor for each one of these. And so then I got back into my history of, I used to create systems like this with weighting factors and how you create weighting factors. And I actually sent a thing out to the advisory board members once again, what do you think is the most important, and I sent this out to our instructors also, what do you think is the most important of these factors? And we did a paired comparison. So every factor got compared to every other factor, and they said this one's more important than this one's more important than this one's more important than this, and we came out with a set of weighting factors. I then took those and I wrote a scaling for each one of those. So I figured we all were familiar with an A, B, C, D, E, and F scale, right? And so I said, okay, we've got, what would an A investigation look like for this factor? What would a B investigation look like? What would a C investigation, a D, or an F, a flunking investigation? And so then for every factor, there's a rating scale, and for every factor, there's a weight, and you rate them 1 to 10, put your number in for that individual investigation, and boom, when you get done, you get a score. And hopefully you get all A's, but occasionally you get B's, C's, D's, and F's, right? And then you can look at a bunch, just like when you're in school, you get grades and you sum them up and you see how you're doing. You could have a whole bunch of investigations. You could average the scores and say, hey, we're getting about C investigations now. And then you can start looking at, well, why are we getting C investigations? What are we doing wrong? What could we improve? What are we doing really good? Maybe you get doing some things really good and you're getting A's on them, but I'm still getting D's on my investigations. Well, what am I missing? What are my gaps? So I sent this out to the advisory board people and said, use it on some investigations and tell me if you think it works. And to a person, they all said yes, they thought it worked and they thought it guided them to finding better ways to improve their investigations. Now that's not a scientific proof, if you will, if it works, but it's a good, what do they call that? Evidence with sort of a hearsay evidence or a good circumstantial story kind of thing that, yeah, everybody likes it. So I haven't applied this to 10,000 investigations and over a period of a decade determined that we increased 73% on our effectiveness of investigations. Maybe 10 years from now I'll come give that presentation. But I do have a sheet that I think works pretty good and I put a lot of time into and we're giving away. So, you get what you pay for. You're getting it for free. I can't guarantee anything, but I think it works pretty good. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do this, all right? So what I've got up here on the thingy, on the screen, is the spreadsheet. And if you're up in the upper left-hand corner, yours should look pretty much like this. Is that true? Somebody shake their head yes. Okay. That good old confirmation. I'm going to sit down here and talk you through this. So, the first column here, column A, it should say factors at the top. And I've got mine, if your Excel spreadsheet here has got your little thing so you can break it up so the column names stay at the top, that's the way I've got mine broken up. If you don't know how to do that, see me about remedial Excel training later on. Okay, yours will just scroll up and down. That's the way it goes. Over here on this side, I've got the factors. And so this is sort of broken up into the 7-step process. As you go through the 7-step process, you're going through these factors. And we start out here with a complete, accurate timeline of what happened has been documented. So really you're talking about up in your evidence collection there in your spring or summer snap chart, you've got a really good summer snap chart. And it says this fact, so okay, here's the factor, here's the explanation of what the factor's about. I thought, well, maybe some people wouldn't understand what that meant, so I got to write more. So what I said was, this factor rates the information collection, including interviewing and documentation. A good incident investigation requires good information collection and documentation to allow analysis. And I think we'd all agree with that, right? If you don't have good stuff going in, you're never going to have a good investigation. So there's face validity to this because we all agree that you got to have good information to have a good investigation. So there's a score, and you can rate it from 1 to 10. And then the weighting factor for this is 0.086, and that's about average. And it says here, for an A, you have to have a detailed, accurate snap chart, or detailed, accurate snap charts that are easy to understand with factual, quantified information and source of evidence identified. Job titles are used instead of names. A summer snap chart shows a thorough job was done collecting information, excellent interviews. So if you're going to get yourself an A, from the reports you're reviewing, you have to be able to tell they did excellent interviews and have a really good summer snap chart. If you can't tell that from the report, you'll have to go back to the people who were doing this and say, hey, listen, tell me about your interviews and let me see your summer snap chart. So you could give, and let me do a save as here too. File, save as. So let me say, I thought they really did a pretty good job. Now, this is 1 to 100 or 1 to, let me see, I think it's 1 to it's 100, 1 to 100. So I'm going to say they did about a 97 here. They were really good. They had a really good snap chart. It was perfect, almost perfect. And maybe there was a little stuff I thought, they could have done that a little bit better. But really, 97 is pretty darn good. I thought that was pretty good. And so they were up here in this A category, 97 in here. Okay? And you can see what here, a B is an easy to understand snap chart that was clear, with clear information and good detail, may have some formatting issues and some sources of information missing. A C is a timeline only or hard to understand snap chart, hard to tell if a good field investigation was done. A D, well, you're getting pretty bad down here. A D, you're getting inaccurate, incomplete timeline or snap chart, poor field investigation. And I'll only do one F, but I'll slide over here and show you what an F looks like, or you can look on your screen. An F is no details of what happened, perhaps only a cause and effect diagram, did not ask people what happened. So I've actually seen investigations where they didn't ask people, they already knew the answers. They'd get an F. So I got a 97 on that one. Next one down, all causal factors identified. And if you've been to the advanced causal factors course, you know that there's really sort of an art to identifying causal factors. If you only identify, I've seen people, I remember a plant I went to, a new guy took over the taproot program from an old guy. He decided there should only be one causal factor. It was just something he decided, it was in his heart. There can only be a single causal factor. And I thought, well, that's strange, but that's the way he was. So he would have probably not done too well on my rating scale here. But why do you want to identify all the causal factors? Why is that important? Somebody shout out an answer. You're identifying all the weaknesses, and if you identify them, hopefully what you're going to try to do is fix them all eventually, right? But you got to find the root causes in between. But if you don't identify all the problems that led to the big problem, then you're missing opportunities to improve. That's why I looked at it. So what you're saying is, I got some, that may be okay, but you missed some. So, the first one here I think says, where'd I go to? Complete and accurate timeline. All causal factors are identified. Let's see. Complete identification of causal factors. Causal factors meet definition of a causal factor. Who did what wrong, or what wasn't done, or what equipment failed. A thorough safeguards analysis was performed to check causal factors for completeness. So not only do you have to, they've got them all, but you checked you were complete by doing a good safeguards analysis. To get an A, that's what you got to do. B, you got most of the causal factors. C, well, you got a single causal factor. And D and below is even worse than that. Okay, so let's say in this case we got most of the causal factors. I'm going to give them an 85. They weren't that good at causal factors, but it was okay. Yes? So the question is, do you think those ought to be, well, actually, I'll repeat his question so everybody can hear it. He said, what happens if you've got some conditions under a causal factor that you think should have been, I'll paraphrase this, a separate causal factor, but they're all grouped together? And in which case, I'd say you're probably out in the high B range. You've got most of the causal factors, but in this case, you're a little, you've got them maybe grouped too much. They're still under there, but you might miss something if you take two causal factors through at a time. So you're not in the A range, or at least you'd be at a very low A range. You'd maybe a high B range if you really did get something. And your answer would be to separate them into two if you want an A. All right, next one. Root causes with supporting evidence are accurately identified for each causal factor. Well, this is the third one, and some people would think we were almost done, but there's a lot more to go through. So this is really the goodness of your root cause analysis. What's an excellent one? Excellent root cause analysis for each causal factor with clear evidence for each root cause. Evidence is recorded in the notes field of the root cause tree portion of the software or on the snap chart. So you're able to tell, here's the root cause they got, and here's the evidence that led them to that root cause. And let's say these guys did a pretty good job, and I'm going to give them a 92 on that. Maybe they could have had a little bit more evidence, but they had some evidence at least for everything, and it was pretty clear, and I liked it, so they're going to get a 92. All right, next one down. Generic causes are identified for each causal factor. Oh, generic causes. Now, this is the first point where you get to where people sometimes forget. They forget to do generic cause. And maybe in this case, let's see. How about a C down here? At least one generic cause identified or some justification for not looking into generic causes was provided. So let's just say they only had one generic cause and they probably should have had some more. And I'm going to give them about a 75 on that. All right, generic causes. Yes?
I had wondered this when you sent it out to us. What if there just weren't any generic?
Well, now, okay, look up at the top one here. Adequate documentation justification to ensure that all generic causes were identified. So you could have justification that we looked for generic causes and there weren't any, and you could still get an A for this. Yep, you could. It is possible not to have generic causes. I find usually you do have generic causes, but it's possible not to. All right, let's go to the next one. Effective correct, yes?
Do you include in that with generic causes, so if there's not a good enough business case, so the impact wasn't that great? Is that?
No, because that's going to be your corrective action decision. So the generic cause is the generic cause no matter what, right? So the question, first question, sir, let me repeat the question so you can hear it. Okay, so her question is, if the impact of the incident was not significant enough, do you have to go find generic causes? And I'd say the answer is no, but that would be your justification for not looking for generic causes. And depending on how good your justification was, you could get an A, a B, or a C on that. So is she saying, how about if I just didn't look, but I have a justification for not looking, and that this was like somebody tripped over the stupid cord here that's got a hump in the middle of the floor, and we already know there's a hump in the middle of the floor, and they've already put colored tape on top of it, and we all know somebody could trip on a hump in the floor, and it's there anyhow, and we're stuck with it, and well, that's not good, but we're going to live with it. And it is possible somebody could trip over it. Well, what do we do? Are we going to do generic cause on that? And the answer is probably not. Because we aren't going to go out and say generically, do I need to go look in every ballroom in the country to see if there's a tripping hazard on the floor? There probably already is, but we're not going to go look for it. It's not important. We're not going to do it. It's not worth the time. We're going to write it off. And I could still give myself an A if I had a really good justification for that. Effective corrective actions proposed for each specific root cause for each causal factor. So now we're going to go through the specific root causes and we're going to check, what was our corrective action like for each of those? And when we get over here, let me go down and let's do a D for one of those. See, it says corrective action poor, ineffective, weak corrective actions used, some or several root causes not addressed by corrective action with weak justification for lack of action. So in this case, they had a few, let's see, what would they have? It would be re-emphasize to employees that we have rules to follow, and some retrain people on the policy that requires doing this. And then we just forgot about a couple others. We just didn't have any corrective actions at all. So I'm going to give them, let's see, what do I give them? Let's give them the D. Ooh, let's give them a 62. They did pretty horrible on that. Okay? And then next one is at least one proposed corrective action is appropriately high enough on the hierarchy of safeguards list. All right, so what am I talking about here? Here's the big long discussion. This factor rates the effectiveness of the most important corrective actions at eliminating or guarding against the biggest risk presented in the incident. Not every corrective action has to provide the strongest level of risk reduction, but to ensure that incidents don't repeat, at least one corrective action should be of a form fairly strong level in the hierarchy of controls. And so it references you to the Taproot book if you don't know what that is. And you remember, there's the eliminate the hazard, eliminate the target. Now, it doesn't mean kill them. Guard the target, which isn't the same level. Guard the target in the, what's the other one in? What's the other rating system?
So it's eliminate, substitute.
No, eliminate the hazard.
Yeah.
Then the target. So let's say you got a human going inside a tank to clean it out. And, it could be an oxygen deficient atmosphere in there. So our normal safeguard would be what? What would be okay, wait a second. First thing we do is what? We're going to have a permitting process for going in the tank, right? And that permitting process is going to require what? Well, it could require respiration, or it could require us to vent the tank so that we can measure that there's a good environment in there, right? So hopefully we eliminate the hazard, we eliminate everything out of the tank so that you can go in there without a breathing system, right? Well, at least we have to have a permitting system to start with. Then we have to go in, then we start figuring out what are we going to do. Can we eliminate the hazard, get rid of the stuff in there? Or maybe we eliminate the target. Hey, it's a bad environment in there. We're going to have a robotic thing go in, a Mr. Vacuum or whatever those things are called, and it's going to sweep up the bottom of the tank. And so we're not going to put any humans in there at all. That'd be eliminating the target. The next thing is guard the target. Guard the target would be some kind of breathing apparatus on their face, some kind of backpack or whatever, so they got something to breathe. And then if we can't do that, well, we're getting pretty sad shape in this example, aren't we? Well, we still could try to measure and do stuff. I don't think you can get away with tell them to be more careful while breathing in the tank. I don't think that's going to work. So I don't think you can get much below guard the target on this one. But on some of them, you're going to have, we've got the easily seen tape on the cord. That was our corrective action. And the easily seen tape doesn't always work, does it? Somebody, I noticed, Dan was up this morning and he was standing this way and he was backing up. And I'm thinking, oh, don't take another 2 or 3 steps. You're going to hit that stupid cord and fall down. But he didn't. He stopped about here, and he kept on talking and turned around and looked this way. So then he was visually could see. Of course, you know, nobody's supposed to ever back up, right? You're always supposed to take your first step forward. What is that? Whose system is that of safety? Anybody remember that? There's a system where you're never supposed to, you can pivot, but you can't take a step backwards. You always have to take your first step forward, because then you can see where you're going all the time. And you have to have eyes on path. Eyes on path. I can't remember all the stupid things. It makes you very safe. Of course, how hard is it to never back up? Really, really hard. At least I have a hard time with it. All right. God shouldn't have given us the ability to go backwards. At least one proposed corrective action is appropriately high enough. So, if I look at your corrective actions, and I don't know if you've seen this, but we call them 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. And about 10 years ago at the summit, this guy came and he said, we implemented Taproot, and we thought we were doing great, but we did an audit at the end of the year because we weren't getting as much improvement as we thought. And we did an audit on our corrective actions, and guess what we found? All our corrective actions were 4s and 5s. Maybe it was 5s and 6s. 5s and 6s. 5s and 6s. And he said, and those aren't very effective. So we made this policy that they every incident they'd rate on a, what'd they call it? A high potential. If it was it was a risk versus frequency matrix on the potential risk versus the potential frequency, not the actual. And so then I guess it would be the actual frequency, but the potential on the other scale. And they said anything that was in the high range, it had to have a 1, 2, or a 3. And a 1, 2, or a 3 was a remove the hazard, remove the target, or guard the target. And if it was in the mid-range, you could go down to a good human factors fix. That was the 4s. And the 5s and the 6s were policies, training, signs, warnings, that kind of stuff. Those were 5s and 6s. 5s and 6s were only allowed for the lowest category. And remember, when they did their audit the year before, everything was 5s or 6s, right? So they required anybody who couldn't meet the policy to get the plant manager's permission to do something less. And in the next year, nobody required, and the plant manager supported this. So in the next year, nobody requested an exemption. And when they did the reviews of every investigation, they checked to make sure they met it. And what they found at the end of the year when they went back and audited again was all the hypos and the middle ones had appropriate corrective actions, but even the low potential ones, a lot of times they found better corrective actions, and they didn't just use 5s or 6s even for those. Now some of them they did, but some of them they didn't. So that their corrective action was markedly improved when they started to require stronger corrective actions. So we're looking at this one and we're going to say, well, they didn't do a very good job on that. Let's give them an F here. Let's give them a 55. They did really poor on this. They didn't have anything better than retrain. So now we're down to effective corrective actions for generic causes. And you know, the generic causes, they didn't do too great a job on identifying them, and they didn't do a very good job on correcting them either, so I'm going to give them a 50 there. And corrective actions are specific. Now we're still rating corrective actions here. And we get down to here, they're specific. And we said, well, yeah, but they were pretty specific. We'll give them a 95 on that. Even though they weren't very good, they were specific. Corrective actions are measurable. I'm going to give them an 88 on that. Even though they weren't very good corrective actions, they were measurable. Corrective actions assigned to specific individual. They did a really good job on that. I'll give them 100 on that. Corrective actions are reasonable, cost justified. Oh, the reasonable part of this one's hard because they didn't do a very good job on corrective actions. So I'm going to go all the way down to probably I'm going to give them a 70 is all. Corrective actions are prompt due to the corrective actions have a prompt due date based on their risk mitigation. So let's look at what this thing says here. about this one? All corrective actions have a due date, but some are a little further out than their risk potential might indicate. So I'm going to give them a 75 maybe. Corrective actions have been reviewed for unintended consequences. Well, they did that and they did it well. Let's give them 100 there. Scroll down just a little bit more. Almost there. Management reviewed the root cause analysis and has accepted it. Management has approved the corrective action. So let's see what good is, what really good is here. Line management, with good understanding of the process involved, good understanding of root cause analysis, and with the authority to commit resources to the corrective actions, reviewed the root cause analysis, accepted the findings, approved the corrective actions, and made sure that the people and resources were assigned to implement the recommendations. So that's a good example of management involvement in the approval of corrective actions. But here's what happened. Line management approved the corrective actions but did not review the root cause analysis or did not make sure the resources were available. So I'm going to give them a 66 here. And last but not least, management has a system to